means he has yet to lose with this deck and will be underway. Right now, Reid is going to start off with a Forest into an Elvish Mystic. And this Green Devotion deck, it's a little different than what you'd expect out of Green Devotion.
Instead of trying to be all in on Nykthos and playing cards like Burning Emissary, Reid's is playing a much more natural, just ramp into big stuff deck, 4 copies of Polukranos, 2 copies of Arbor Colossus, 4 copies of Genesis Wave, and sort of stabilizes his mid-game through Planeswalkers, Dahlmarie, Xenagos, Nissa, and so forth. We've seen some of these lists play things like Eidolon of the Blossoms, for example, to be that stabilizing presence, retouching red for some Planeswalkers instead.
All right, well, Reid does start out with some mana accelerants. He had Mystic into Voyaging Satyr. The Mystic hit for 1, but he's on the back foot. Tom was able to do a typical red creature curve, Rakdos Cackler into Ash Zealot, and he has Reid at 16.
So acceleration into Polukranos is really tough for Rabble Red to beat. That said, Reid doesn't have a lot of time to assemble this sort of thing, and his Planeswalkers are not going to be that potent in the matchup.
And well, thanks to the double mana accelerant, he had 5 mana on turn 3, so it wasn't a turn 3 Polukranos, it was a turn 3 Arbor Colossus, which should do pretty much the same thing.
It's going to blunt the offensive. Now, Tom can still attack through this. It's not quite as good as Polukranos in the same spot, but this is a good opening for Reid. There's also a matchup that's very play-draw biased, and Reid winning the choice, it's a big edge here.
Yeah, Tom is going to go ahead and swing into Arbor Colossus with a pair of 2/2s. Now, is he throwing away a creature here, or is this a dangerous block for Reid?
Well, it can only be so dangerous. There are 4 copies of Rubble Belt Maka. There's a couple pump spells, a couple burn spells. So Tom is, at minimum, going to be 2 for 1-ing himself here.
Yeah, I was going to ask if we were going to see a double Maka on the block. Reid makes the block, and that's exactly what we get.
It's not pretty, but Tom really doesn't have any other choice.
Now, Tom makes his 3rd land, adds another Rakdos Cackler. Only 2 cards remaining in his hand after having to 2 for 1 himself there, but he's banging on the fact that Reid doesn't have another fatty to block with.
And this is such a good turn for Reid here. Getting to play Polukranos plus have a chump blocker and Elvish Mystic if he so desires.
Yeah, made another Mystic, made a Polukranos, and picked up a red source in the form of Stomping Ground. It means when he untaps, he'll have 7 mana for Polukranos, which means when he monstresses it, he will be able to take down a creature as well.
Yeah, the critical flashpoint is the 5th mana. That allows him to knock out a 2/2.
So I guess my question here then would be, can Reid afford to block if Tom swings with the Polukranos, or can he afford to not block? He would like to not lose his Polukranos.
Well, the thing that he can do is he can put Polukranos in front of a Rakdos Cackler. In the event that Tom has something like a Titan Strength or another Rubble Belt Maka, at least Tom is down both the card he uses and the Rakdos Cackler. The only really bad block, in my opinion, in this spot is if Reid puts the Polukranos in front of the Ash Zealot. In the event that Tom has a pump spell there, Reid just loses his Polukranos outright.
Well, Tom has 1 card remaining, and he has that Telltale red mana up for maybe a Titan Strength or a Maka. His swing was the 3 2/2s, and his play for the turn was Goblin Rabble Master, so a Goblin token is also getting in. It's a swing for 7. Reid's going to have to do some math as to what he wants to block. I guess if he wants to keep his Polukranos alive, he could always make it block the Goblin token, and then it's completely safe.
A lot of this also depends on what kind of follow-up does Reid left over in his hand. If he has something powerful, he can afford to be a little bit more aggressive with his block and potentially risk losing the Polukranos. If he has nothing left over, let's say the last card in his hand is a land, he may be slightly more conservative with his block and say, put the Polukranos in front of the Goblin token and maybe chump block with the Mystic.
Right, so right now, he's going to go ahead and block the Goblin with the Polukranos and actually just take 6. That seems to suggest that his play next turn is just to monstrous the Polukranos.
It does indicate to me that he probably does not have a good card left over in his hand. Now, going to 8 here is important. Tom's list with 4 copies of Stoke the Flames, so Reid is now in range conceivably of getting killed that way.
All right, Reid untaps. And there's a bit of a game here. If he wants, I'm assuming the monstrous activation on Polukranos is going to take care of the Rabble Master. It's Tom's best creature, but Reid has to decide, because he'd have to use mana creatures to make that play. He's now kind of stuck in a situation where he has to decide whether he wants to eat the Rabble Master right now and lose a potential blocker, or do it after blocks, but then the Rabble Master gets to make another Goblin token.
I don't think he cares too much about the Goblin token. He has 4 blockers to 4 attackers. He gets to put Voyaging Satyr in front essentially for free. There is a Mutavault that complicates things slightly, but I don't think he has to necessarily preempt it. He can allow Tom to go into attackers and go from there.
Sure.
It's still tough. I mean, and that at that point, you know, Rubble Belt Maka could potentially complicate things quite a bit. But It appears as though Reid is happy to allow Tom to untap here and use Polukranos inside of combat.
Reid does just that. He does not have a 5th land, so he's representing 7 mana. That's a monstrosity for X equals 3. And we're going to go over to Tom's side of the board. He drew a 2nd card right now with a trio of 2/2s, a Rabblemaster, and a Mutavault, facing down 3 mana creatures and a Polukranos. And if it wasn't his hand before, it would be a great draw. He's going to add an Ash Zealot to the board.
And Ash Zealot is great here for Tom. A haste creature, a first striker complicates blocks quite a bit too.
Yeah, he also still has enough mana to activate the Mutavault if he wants to. He's going to go to combat, and activating Mutavault, he's going to go ahead and swing in with at least 6 creatures, maybe 7.
The clowns.
Everything, right. Rabblemaster is staying home.
Well, maybe, I think. I don't know. Not sure if Tom has made up his mind on that one yet.
It would be a 4/2 if it attacks right now because Mutavault is a goblin, so it would get a pump off that. Granted, it would probably be the creature that got to earn the privilege of running into a Polukranos if it decides to attack.
I feel like Tom almost has to send in everything because Reid just has the option of shooting down a creature and also blocking with the Polukranos. So you don't really gain anything by leaving the Rabblemaster back on defense.
Yeah, Tom comes to the same conclusion. Rabblemaster is part of his attack.
Because if you don't attack with the Rabblemaster, maybe Reid decides I can weather the storm of the Rabblemaster next turn and just focus on preserving my life total this turn, shoot down an attacker with Polukranos and block something else. So
right.
I think Tom's hand is kind of forced here. He just needs to attack with everything.
We know this attack's good for at least 4 damage. He has enough extra attackers, or at least 3 damage. Reid, if he chooses to kill a 2/2 and block everything, will take 3 on unblocked creatures. But it seems like Tom's just trying to set up a situation, right, where then next turn, if Reid chumps away enough of his board, that Tom will have a lethal attack.
Yeah.
You know, outside of the Polukranos monstrosity activation and the block by Polukranos, Reid's blocks are pretty poor here.
Yeah, you can double block a Rakdos Cackler with an Elvish Mystic, for example. You can put the Voyaging Satyr in front of the token, but as you mentioned, these are not great blocks. These Ash Zealots are going to go uncontested. Tom will still get to keep a large part of his board intact to attack with next turn, and also deal some damage this turn as well.
So we're going to see Voyaging Satyr and Elvish Mystic are going to go ahead and double block a Mutavault. So that'll be a 1-for-1 trade. Polukranos is going to eat the Rabblemaster. Reid trying to figure this out. Right now, he would be forced to chump then with the Mystic and and Monstrosity, and then would go to 2.
So this is a really difficult block for Reid.
Yeah, where we are in combat right now, Reid has not let the Rabblemaster become a 4/2 just yet. He's holding with that trigger on the stack.
And I think Reid is just looking at what do his prospective blocks look like.
Right, so we're not technically in blockers right now. He's just figuring stuff out.
Because the problem here is if Reid allows the Rabblemaster trigger to resolve and then fights the Rabblemaster, then it's conceivable Polukranos could die in combat to whatever it blocks, because the Rabblemaster fights back.
Right. Well, Polukranos will get to be a 7/7, so it should still be fine. It's going to eat an Ash Zealot, so Polukranos takes 2, and then takes 4 more from the Rabblemaster, but that's not 1 short of being lethal. Reid's going to go ahead and chump a Cackler, double block a Mutavault, and then takes 5 off unblocked creatures. 1 off the Goblin token, 2 off an Ash Zealot, and 2 off a Cackler. So he'll drop to 3. And the aftermath here is that Ross loses. Okay, Reid.
Yeah, Reid put a double block
Okay.
on the Mutavault.
And then he traded with the Goblin token, so he went to 2.
Yeah.
So Tom is left with Ash Zealot, Cackler, and Reid is left with Mystic and Polukranos, and 2 life.
It is.
Let's say 4 life.
It is dangerous, but it's still. Stabilization is still conceivable from here. I mean, he has the biggest creature in play.
Okay. Reid's going to play another mana creature and just going to hold back on defense. He is in Stoke the Flames range, and that's a card that you said is a I believe a 4 of in Tom's deck.
He was in double Stoke range before, and now he's in single.
And Tom's just going to go ahead and build up an army again with a second Rabble Master here. And he'll go ahead and swing the team through.
So the burn here in Tom's list is 4 copies of Stoke the Flames and 3 Lightning Strikes. So even the token connecting in the spot is significant.
Yeah, he's increasing his outs, his straight win outs from 4 to 7 by turning on those Lightning Strikes. Not to mention that it seems like the blocks that are happening here aren't even that unfavorable for Tom. Well, I guess he's trading an Ash Zealot and a Goblin token for an Elvish Mystic.
A lot of times, yeah, you focus on red decks and, you know, mana to power ratios on creatures is really significant, but Tom's creatures having 2 toughness has been a really big deal here. Reid would have had much easier blocks if that wasn't the case.
If Tom left with still 3 creatures in play, Reid down to 2. Reid could use another creature, you know, he could, that's bigger than a 2/2. Something like a Courser of Krufix would help him a lot here. He does have a 5th land, and he's just going to pass.
And I believe Reid has no instants in his deck. It's just planeswalkers and creatures.
It's just planeswalkers and creatures. There's no tricks here.
Now the thing is, decks like Reid's regularly have Court of Calling in them. So Tom still has to think about this. I can't imagine him not just attacking and seeing what happens, but Reid is making a good face of it here because decks like his sometimes have an out in this scenario.
Yeah, well, if he had Court, you'd have to think he'd have played it last turn, right? He didn't use his main phase mana.
Yeah, it's possible. Or maybe he drew it this turn.
Sure. Either way, Tom probably can't afford to play around Court either. Just, you know, I'm not, if it's something like Court for Courser, can Tom win through that would be a question.
Yeah. But you can see at least Tom's giving it some pause here. He is respecting the possibility of Cord.
Yeah. Right now, so with no instance in Reid's deck, a turn sideways should do it. And yeah, Reid wants Tom to commit to the attack. Tom does, and we are on to game 2.
So Tom able to weather the storm there with a very fast Arbor Colossus and Polukranos with Reid on the play. It feels like if Reid had one powerful follow-up to his first 2 creatures, that would have been enough to cement the board, but he was able to find it, and Tom escapes. Goblin Rabble Master is just so good. I mean, it's almost silly to say at this point, but those are games, you know, I played a lot of games in Tom's position with those kind of decks before, and pre-Rabble Master, that opening would have been very challenging to beat, but it did just enough to allow Tom to push through lethal.
Yeah, it gives him just enough extra attackers, it seems.
Yeah.
All right, going to the sideboard, we'll start on Reid Duke's side. This seems like a matchup that he's paid a lot of attention to based on his sideboard. He gets to start with 4 Nylea's Disciple.
He has a lot of respect for red beatdown decks, clearly. 4 copies of Nylea's Disciple, along 2 copies of Mizium Mortars, a Scavenging Ooze, a Bow of Nylea, and a Setestan Tactics in his sideboard that he could bring in for this matchup.
So Nylea's Disciple seems pretty tailor-made for matchups against red decks, be it Rabble Red or Burn. Some of the other cards, like, talk to me a little bit about Bow of Nylea. This is a card that's a 1 of in his sideboard that does have a tap gain 4 life, and it can grow a mana creature, which both seem good, but the card is rather slow.
It's still worth it, and Reid's got a lot of mana acceleration. You can start putting +1/+1 counters on Sylvan Caryatid and really locking up the ground that way. Or you can just start gaining 3 life a turn once the board's relatively stable. I think in my time playing aggressive red decks against Green Devotion, never beaten this card. You can only have so many of them because they're expensive and narrow, but if Reid has any sort of draw backed up by a bow, he's going to be in really good shape. On Tom's side of the table, 3 copies of Eidolon of the Great Revel, 3 Magma Sprays, a Mutavault, a Harness by Force, 2 Mizium Mortars, 2 Boros Reckoners, a Dyna Charge, 2 copies of Skullcrack. So a couple cards I like in this matchup. 3 copies of Magma Spray, very good against a deck that's packing Voyaging Satyr and Elvish Mystic. That's pretty easy to bring in. I don't really like Harness by Force, even though Reid does have some big creatures, because Reid also has a sea of chump blockers and a lot of boards. There are spots where taking Polukranos or Arbor Colossus will be great for Tom, and maybe bringing in the 1 Harness is a good proposition, but it's very easy to have too much of that effect. I think the 2 Mortars will probably come in, again, additional removal. Tom can reasonably suspect that Reid has Courser Krufix in his deck, even though it didn't show up. And I think the one copy of Dynacharge is legitimate to bring in here as well. Reid is not going to be killing Tom's stuff by and large. You saw that game. Tom was really able to build up his board. The only way his creatures were dying were inside of combat on Tom's turns. So Dynacharge could conceivably be pretty excellent here.
So if you expect to have 3-4 creatures in play, then Dynacharge becomes a much stronger card than it normally is.
Especially in concert with Legion Loyalists. That's a scenario where, you know, you play your Legion Loyalist, you have your Battalion trigger. Reid is making some blocks that look like trades, some blocks that, you know, maybe he's trying to eat some creatures, maybe chump some others, etc. And Dynacharge can blow up those blocks in a major way. So in matchups where your opponent is not really going to be attacking your board very much, I think Dynacharge is going to be, by and large, an excellent card. I mean, if the board really gets gummed down, Reid has a lot of blockers. Maybe it's less effective, but again, Tom only has the one copy, so I think it's worth it.
So a lot of this sideboarding plan, you're saying, out of the red deck, it looks he has the option to go after Reid's mana creatures.
Yeah.
And at least from your perspective, that's something Tom will be interested in.
If Tom's going to lose this game, it's going to be to things like Genesis Hydra and to Polukranos, most likely. And the best way to fight those kind of cards, because you can't really beat them once they're in play, is try to delay their presence as long as you possibly can.
Seems fair enough. On Reid's side, so it's interesting, his deck probably boards out most of the Planeswalkers, I would think, in this matchup. Cards like Nylea's Disciple, you know, just it seems like the plan of making 3/3s is just pretty solid against a deck like Tom's.
For sure. I think the one copy of Garruk has to go. I think the 2 Nisses and the 3 copies of Xenagos are not good as well. I think Domri is still fine because Reid has enough big creatures where the minus power on Domri will be an effective tool. But the Planeswalkers are the most suspicious cards in the matchup, especially Xenagos. If he's familiar with Tom's build and knows that Tom is playing with Legion Loyalist, then Xenagos can become close to useless.
Yeah, Legion Loyalists, Battalion trigger does have it so that tokens can't block this turn, which does come up against Xenagos the Reveler.
Yeah. Xenagos and Elspeth, the cards where that comes up most commonly.
Yeah, both of these players. So recapping, we have right now Tom Ross and Reid Duke. We are playing Day 2 of the Invitational. This is our first standard round. Remember, Reid Duke was one of the 2 players to go 8-0 on day 1. So far 4-0 with Green-Red Devotion. And Tom Ross is your defending Invitational champion, trying to make it back-to-back for Invitational top 8s.
And the winner of this match would have to have a huge collapse to not make the elimination rounds. This is not a win-in, but this is fairly close.
Yeah, it's pretty close. You would think either of these players, if they can win 2 of the first 3 rounds of Standard, would be a lock to make top 8.
Yeah.
In game 2, we are underway. Reid Duke is on the play and once again has a turn 1 Elvish Mystic. And last time we saw him ramp into a turn 3 Arbor Colossus, which ended up trading with double Makas. Let's see what we can do this turn. And this is kind of what I was hoping for last game. It's going to be a turn 2 Courser of Krufix.
This is the start, and Tom really needs to have Mizium Mortars here.
And Courser seems like it's very difficult for Tom's deck to deal with. It's got the right numbers on it to deal with 2/2s, and it gains life.
You can have Rumble Belt, Maka, sometimes Titan Strength, depending on the numbers on your creatures. And that can be effective. Mizium Mortars kills it straight away, but of the cards that Rabble Red play against most commonly, Courser is one of the most problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. On top of Reid's deck, a little bit of negative synergy for him is a second copy of Nykthos. He already has one in play. Tom gets to see that one, but...
Yeah, you make your own Lotus Petal. You gain a life, it's still fine.
Yeah. I mean, right now, Reid is on the board, has 2 creatures on the board to Tom's 0. You have to think that is not where the red deck wants to be playing from.
And Tom's deck with a lot of 1-mana creatures in it.
And pretty interesting play there. On turn 2, he's going to go Burning Tree Emissary into Burning Tree Emissary into Stoke the Flames for the Courser of Krufix.
Has to get it off the table. You know, I'm sure that Stoke he would like to keep for other things, but like Reid's life total, for example, but
yeah,
doesn't really have a choice.
And even so, he's going to have to face one down. Reid just plays a replacement Courser of Krufix, drops Stomping Ground, and passes the turn back. Gains a life and does have the blocker in play. And no respect here. Tom's going to go ahead and swing both of the Burning Tree Emissaries right into the Courser.
And I'm not even sure Tom has anything here. This may be a straight bluff.
I mean, you have to swing, right? Because if you're not swinging, how are you winning?
Yep, correct. And the thing is, Reid knows this. Reid knows that Tom probably has to attack here no matter what his hand looks like.
The question is, can Reid... So Reid knows if he blocks, there's a non-zero chance that he just gets a free emissary. Is it worth the courser to make that call?
Here's the thing, Reid's life total is pretty high here. He can afford to fall to 17 potentially here and just say, you know, even though I know you could be bluffing here, it's the reward of calling is not worth the risk, given what my hand looks like and how high my life total is.
Yeah, Rakdos Cackler then added post-combat for Tom Ross alongside Fire Fist Striker. So 4 creatures in play. Tom has 2 cards left. Among them is Harnessed by Force out of the sideboard. And the fact that Reid's deck plays no removal makes this a really scary matchup to watch from Reid's side. You know, he seemed pretty far ahead. At least he had a great draw, right? Turn 1 Mystic into turn 2 Courser, turn 3 Courser on the play. That's great against Red. And even now, things seem tenuous for him.
He needs more help. I mean, this is the opening where if Reid has a little bit more action along the way here, he's going to be able to stabilize. But you are right. It is a scary matchup, and Reid's draw thus far has been about as good as you can ask for, and still not clear it's going to be good enough.
Reid's going to play a free Temple of Abandon off the top. He's deciding on Polukranos World Eater, how he wants to scry it. He does already have a lot of fat in his hand. He has Nylea, God of the Hunt, alongside Genesis Hydra already. So whether or not he needs another green thing to tap out for, we'll see on this scry.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I really love Tom's sideboard, the 1 Dynacharge, the 1 Harnessed by Force. These are effects that it's very easy to have too many of. Even the second copy will be useless a lot of the time. But playing just one of these things, imagine if he has Harnessed by Force or Dynacharge this game, they could potentially be very, very good.
Yeah, Reid chooses to keep the Polukranos on top, and then he makes Sylvan Caryatid. And we'll see where we're at now. Reid is still at 18 life, so he's not... His life total is not low, but he is in danger on the board. Tom has 8 power and 1 falter effect. When Fire Fist Striker. Tom can almost freely swing the team and make Courser not block. He's going to swing the team and make Elvish Mystic not block.
And Tom is doing this basically as a continuation of the bluff from the previous turn. If he targets the Courser there, that's an indicator that he doesn't have a pump spell because he's, you know, he would love for this Courser to get involved in combat if he does have a pump spell. So
right.
The easiest thing would be to target, assuming Tom doesn't have a pump spell, the easiest thing to do is to target the Courser and say, yeah, the Mystic gets a trade and the Caryatid gets to bounce off of something. But because Reid respected the bluff last turn, Tom's continuing with the bluff the following turn.
Now, if you Reid, though, does this make you think that it's not so much of a bluff anymore? I mean, is Tom aggressive enough to just throw away a Fire Fist Striker in the name of a bluff?
I don't know, but Tom is doing a very good job of selling it.
Yeah, it looks like Reid is going to put the Caryatid in front of the Fire Fist Striker. If Tom has a trick, that block likely won't get the trick from Tom. He's getting 6 free damage right now.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not 100% that I've seen Tom's hand, but I suspect there's no pump effect here. And if that is the case, you are seeing some incredible magic from Tom.
Yeah, he has, he doesn't have
Yeah, he has a Mountain and a Harness by Force.
And a Satyr Fire Drinker. And that's it for the 3 cards. So he doesn't have the pump spell. And the question is, yeah, is Tom crazy enough to risk the Fire Fist Striker just in the name of a bluff? And the answer here is yes.
Well, the thing is, you can't go halfway with these kind of bluffs. If you had it the last turn, you still have it in your hand. Reid still believes that you have it in your hand. You got to keep going.
Fire Drinker Satyr joins the board as Tom's 5th creature. Reid is now down to 12. His draw for the turn was Polukranos. Has a Scavenging Ooze coming up next.
These red beatdown decks are mindless aggro. I mean, you're seeing evidence to the contrary right now.
And it's interesting, if Reid makes the block the first time and just calls Tom on the bluff, this game's very different.
The game's probably over. I mean, Tom would not be dead by now, but he would have nowhere near enough resources to work with.
Yeah. And it's possible, like, the reason Reid doesn't make the calls, he just doesn't feel like he feels like he can win giving away the damage. You know, he's more or less given Tom 4 to 6 points of free damage by respecting a bluff.
Yeah.
And if his hand's good enough, that's the right move.
Bluffing the Duke is some gutsy magic.
I'm wondering if we may see Genesis Hydra here. He has options between Genesis Hydra and Polukranos this turn. My guess is we'll see the Hydra just because he wants to get more permanence onto the battlefield. But I could be wrong on this.
But is he willing to commit any mana creatures is another thing too.
Right.
For example, something that he can do now that he knows the top card of his deck is he could tap the Nykthos and 2 mana, that's 4. He could Genesis Hydra for 2, get an Ooze with a green up and 2 mana creatures. That's a pretty compelling board.
I agree. And I was saying, yeah, the interaction there between Genesis Hydra and Scavenging Ooze takes a lot of the randomness out of the equation.
Yeah. It looks like Reid's doing something else, but I guess there is only the 1 creature in the graveyard right now, so he could Genesis Hydra for more if he wanted to.
Now he's going to go ahead and Nykthos for 4. We'll see if it is that Hydra for 2 play. Scavenging Ooze is a great card to hit in this scenario, too.
Yeah.
It really incentivizes to Reid to start blocking and making trades.
I think this is the path that Reid's pursuing, and he's just determining how large does he want to make this Genesis Hydra.
Yeah, does he want... Can he... If he makes it a 2-2, that is the safest play, but this is one of the greedier plays then. So he gets a 3-3 here. You know, he doesn't want to trade the Hydra. He wants it to win combat.
Yeah, he needs 3-3s to stabilize his board. 2-2s are just more trades, you know?
Right. Hits for 3. It's going to be Scavenging Ooze that it gets off the top. Remember, Reid hasn't played a land yet. If this flip is a land, Reid also gets to cash a land off this. And it's not a land, but it's pretty good.
pretty good here.
It's the Tessin Tactics. Reid's going to Legend Rule his own Nykthos with the Nykthos he was keeping. And now with enough mana symbols, Reid is not done here. He's going to go ahead and use that Nykthos. It activates for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mana. He can make Polukranos on 4 and have enough mana to activate it for 1, eating Firefist Striker.
So what you're seeing here is perhaps the Reid's willingness to take a couple points of damage here and there, protecting that Courser, because those 2 green mana symbols in play and now this 2-4. I do not believe Tom has any shot of getting out from under this.
It seems unlikely. He has Harnessed by Force in his hand, but right now, there's just too many creatures. Tom has 4, but Reid has 6, and Reid's are larger.
And this is, you know, my concern with Harnessed by Force in the sideboard here is the boards of Green Devotion often look like this, or they look like some mana creatures and a Courser of Kruphix. It's very rare that your opponent taps everything and their mana creatures and taps out for an Arbor Colossus. It happens from time to time, but it's definitely the exception rather than the rule.
The play for the turn from Tom Ross was a Boros Reckoner.
Yeah, 2 copies of those in the sideboard. They're not bad against Green Devotion. They're pretty annoying for the deck to block. Once the game gets into this spot, it's too little too late, but because the deck's all mana creatures and huge stuff, Boros Reckoner lines up pretty well against
both halves of that spectrum.
Exactly.
Yeah. Generally, against a deck that's not playing black or blue, Boros Reckoner can be a pretty good beating.
Yeah. It very much may be too little too late here, but...
It forces Reid to go big, right? Because if Reid starts to just attack with things like Polukranos, he's liable to take 6 off the Reckoner, and you're never sure how many life points he's working with. Reid here is going to go ahead and play Nylea, God of the Hunt. Remember, he made mana off Nykthos. He used his extra 2 mana to eat some creatures and pump into Scavenging Ooze. And we may just see a pass by Reid.
Yeah, there's no rush here. And if the Reckoner ever is about to get involved in combat, Reid can just Tessin Tactics, use the Courser Kruphix to fight the Boros Reckoner. That's a fairly safe fight. And Reid can afford to take 3 points of damage to the face. At this point, he's at 15. And if Tom wants to just trade the Reckoner for the Courser, that's also fine at this point. Reid has more than enough to work with.
Yeah, that remaining card in Reid's hand, as you mentioned, is Tessin Tactics. You see another Polukranos on top of Reid's deck. Normally, a second copy of a legendary creature can be a downside. In this situation, Reid would be just fine recasting a Polukranos just so he can have another monstrous trigger.
Yeah, he may want to clean out what's left of Tom's board here so he doesn't have to worry about anything.
Yeah, with Tactics and the Polukranos, he has 2 ways to do it. And 15 is still a pretty high number.
Yeah, this has gotten away from Tom. I think we've likely hit the point of no return in this game.
Well, right now Reid has a 4-4, a 3-3, a 6, and 2 6-6s. And it's a lot of. His board's just a lot bigger.
The Nylea complicates things as well because Tom can't try to sit behind a Boros Reckoner and moat all of Reid's huge stuff because Nylea gives trample. So Reid is much more free to attack with his huge creatures.
Yeah, so with trample, he only actually deals 3 damage to the Reckoner as opposed to the entirety of the creature's power.
Correct.
Tom checking that out, I believe, for the same interaction. With a lot of mana, Nylea can really be that nail in the coffin here. Nylea's a 2-of in Reid's deck.
And Tom may be at the point now that because he cannot block with the Boros Reckoner, he may want to attack with it. Instead, we've done this. The last
Rubble Belt Maka.
The last refuge of the damned. The hard cast Rubble Belt Maka. I've been here before. It is not pretty.
When you're paying the same amount of mana for your Maka that they're paying for their Pulukronos.
It's close, you know.
Right.
Maka, Pulukronos, they're close in play. Now, hard casting a Rubble Belt Maka does come up a fair bit against Black Devotion because of the way the games play out. But against Green Devotion, this is not where you want to be.
Guy is a red, hopefully is a red giant growth if everything's going according to plan.
Against the Courser Caryatid deck, that's kind of what it's there for.
Reid's gonna go ahead. Looks like we're on Tom's end step. He's gonna Cetessan Tactics this Scavenging Ooze. That'll make it up to a 5/5.
And I think this is likely to be lethal because he can use the Pulukronos to fight the Fire Drinker Satyr, which is a ton of damage.
Yeah, Ooze will fight Maka. He was able to strive it once, so Pulukronos is going to fight Fire Drinker Satyr, and as you said, that does deal 6 to Tom.
And now, you know, Tom has no tricks from this spot, with the exception of the possibility of Stoke the Flames, but Reid can probably play around that pretty easily as he's making his attack here. He's got so much mana to work with, so many huge creatures.
So here, Reid just figuring out what the best way to make this lethal is. Remember, all his creatures have trample, and right now his devotion to green is fairly sizable. He has, I believe, of 10. So he has what looks like 3 Nylea activations if he wants them. He's going to swing everything but the mana creatures. Yeah, he has 12 mana, 13 mana available right now. So 3 + 2 + 2 triggers, and that'll do it. Reid takes down the second game.
Yeah, not a lot to be done there from Tom's spot. Reid did a very good job there of navigating that board. There was some risk there. You know, he's taking all these points of damage by respecting the possibility of Tom's pump spell there, but Reid really needed that 2 points of devotion in play that the Courser was providing to enable his whole hand. And once Reid got to cast all this stuff, Tom's not going to be able to keep up with that.
Right. I mean, in some ways, it looks like Tom bluffed Reid. And you say, okay, well, that might be true. And it may also be Reid feels like he's in a safe enough position that he doesn't have to call the bluff. So he just choose, you know, he thinks he can, if he thinks he can give away 3 points of life, not ever have to call a bluff and win anyway, well, then that's what he'd want to do.
Correct. I'm sure it's on Reid's radar, the possibility that Tom is attacking with nothing. That when Reid's deciding whether or not he wants to make his block there, that's part of the calculation. But at the initial block, he's on 21, falling to 17. His Courser's worth too much to give away there to a Rubble Belt Maka or to a Titan Strength. The following turn, Tom continues with the bluff, allows the Courser to get into combat. At that point, it's really hard to believe that Tom's bluffing, first of all. I mean, that's gutsy to run it back the second time in a spot where you're definitely going to lose if you get called. But Reid can look at his hand and say, all right, well, what I can do with all this mana, the Nykthos I have in play, the 4 green devotion I have at minimum going into the next turn, I can afford to take this hit too. It's a little bit scary, but likely what happens the next turn is I'm able to play enough to stabilize this board, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. Courser, what I was really impressed with that game there was how good Courser of Krufix is in this matchup. No.
It's hard to beat, man. It's hard to beat. I lost a lot of that card.
Reid had it turn 2 and 3 on the play.
Yeah. The thing is, there's enough inefficiencies going on with the green devotion list that you can usually keep up even if they get a Courser online. It's not going to be game over by itself, but it's an important piece of the puzzle. It allows them to step to the next part of the game, which is Polukranos, Arbor Colossus, setting up a big Setessan tactics, getting a Scavenging Ooze online, the plays that really cement the board for green devotion.
Right, and as is the case with these green decks, their draws are pretty variable. There are only 4 Elvish Mystics in the deck, and their best draws all involve Elvish Mystic. And Reid has been fortunate enough to have one on turn 1 both games, but especially when he's on the draw here, if he has a non-Mystic hand, there's the possibility that he really just gets aggroed out before he gets to play.
The Rabble Reds, their best draws, their Burning Tree Emissary draws, on the play, if you don't have a mana accelerant, it's very hard to win. Now, with that said, Reid does have Elvish Mystic, Voyaging Satyr, Sylvan Caryatid. He has a lot of plays, but I think that if Tom keeps 7, Reid will almost certainly mulligan any hand that doesn't contain some sort of mana creature.
Is a turn 2, I'm even wondering though, if you're on the draw here, is a turn 2 mana accelerant realistically going to be good enough?
If it's Caryatid, yes. Because you can block depending on what your hand looks like, and for sure it's going to get into the next turn. Voyaging Satyr, not so much, because Tom is, it blocks much less effectively, and Tom is likely to just kill it with one of his removal spells.
Yeah.
But if Reid's first play of the game is, let's say, Courser Crewfix, that's his opening hand, some lands, Courser Crewfix.
Can't keep that.
I don't think he can keep those. On the play, I think some of those hands are acceptable. On the draw, you just got to let him go.
I mean, even if he has a mana accelerant hand with one of the 2 mana accelerants, I would say in order to keep it, he has to have a pretty good follow-up on turn 3. Something like Courser Third Land, Polukranos, maybe Nylea's Disciple.
He has to be willing to be specific here. And there's some slow cards in his deck, some amount of dead weight, some things that are predicated on other things showing up. So, a mana creature and a turn 3 Nylea, let's say, that's not acceptable either. So he needs to have a mixture of early stuff to do and some late game payouts, although I think he can also afford to keep hands that are mostly mana and hope to draw something relevant in time.
Yeah. I think what you have to compete with is it's not unreasonable to think that Tom will have 3 creatures by the end of his second turn.
Yeah, he can go 1-drop, 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 or he can go 1-drop, Burning Tree Emissary, creature.
Right. We're seeing whether or not Tom is keeping his hand. He's going to go ahead and mulligan. Now it's over to Reid.
I believe that I saw Reid mouth, I'll keep, but by the looks of things, he's still considering this.
All right, so we talked about how there's a pretty high bar for Reid to keep his hands, right? You wanted to have a mana accelerant, and if it's 2 mana accelerant, you wanted to have a really good follow-up. Does Tom going to 6 lower that bar for you?
Yeah. Makes it a lot less likely that Tom has one of his really explosive starts that causes Reid to have something on time. Also means Tom is less likely to be able to kill a mana creature if
Right.
Reid's able to deploy one early on in the game.
It's those triple creature starts that Reid has to be most worried about. We'll see whether or not Tom pulls one off. Our game is underway. It starts on Rakdos Cackler by Tom Ross. And I don't think he has a second land. I think he has more 1-drops.
Yeah, it looks like he has a Fire Drinker Satyr, a Legion Loyalist. Got stuff to do.
Yeah, by no means is out of this. But right now, I don't believe he has any more mana sources.
Keep plenty of 1-landers with these sort of hands, especially when you mulligan. You can't go to 5.
I mean, 1-landers, is it possible that 1-landers are better than 3-landers on 6 cards?
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Yeah, so it's the second best outcome. Like, ideally, you'd want a 2-lander, but okay, you'll take 1.
And if you draw your mountain on turn 2.
For the 3rd straight game there, Reid did have the turn 1 Elvish Mystic. And Tom does make a triple creature start. It's Burning Tree Emissary into Fire Drinker Satyr. Interestingly, Tom had the option between making 2 creatures versus making Eidolon of the Great Revel. That's something he brought in out of the sideboard.
I would play it the way that Tom played it. Just needs to get as much stuff in play as fast as possible.
So walk me through Eidolon. Tom brought those in out of the sideboard, and now I understand Reid has a lot of mana creatures. It also seems like Reid has a lot of creatures that would go over the top of that.
He does, but let's imagine that Tom has an Eidolon, and it triggers for him 3 times and for Reid once. Tom's probably happy with that exchange.
Yeah. All right, well, Reid plays a temple there, scries, and then makes a 2nd mana creature in Voyaging Satyr, passes back the turn, and we could see something like a turn 3 Arbor Colossus. I'm assuming something big's coming down next turn. How does Tom want to respond? He gets to deal some damage this turn. Definitely 4, maybe 6.
Yeah, he has a Legion Loyalist in hand, so I think he was contemplating playing that before combat and attacking with everything. The problem is that given how many cards he has in his hand and the board state and all that, Reid is almost 100% to block the Legion Loyalist with the Voyaging Satyr. And if Tom doesn't have a combat trick to follow that up, he loses the Legion Loyalist for just nothing. So it's not ideal for him, but I think Tom has to attack this way because Tom can't bluff this attack. Reid's calling almost certainly.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good chance that Reid's, impact play is a 4-drop, be it Disciple or Pelucranos. So if that's true, this Voyaging Satyr isn't actually an accelerant anymore either. Reid still has it. And you see Reid here decided to trade off his Voyaging Satyr for Satyr Fire Drinker.
Correct, yeah. So
yeah.
Tom can't make a bluff like he did the last game.
Yeah, Eidolon was the play for Tom, still on 2 lands, 2 cards remaining in his hand. Now we'll get to see what the payoff here was for Reid. It's not going to be a 4-drop, though. His land for the turn is another Temple. And if he's playing land, that means he doesn't have a Courser either. Imagine we're not going to see much other than a Caryatid from Reid this turn, which is a pretty good opening for Tom Ross.
And you can see why Reid contemplated the opening hand for so long. It did have some good action, it did have these mana creatures. It has his red mana and all that, but he is a little slow out of the gates right now.
Yeah, he did have a turn 3 Arbor Colossus in his hand, but he made the decision, and I think rightly so, that delaying the Arbor Colossus for a turn was worth killing the Fire Drinker Satyr.
Yeah, he can't afford to take that hit and then tap out for Arbor Colossus. That's not getting it done if Tom has almost any spell left over in his hands.
Right. So he scries there, and what it's going to be is a removal spell for Reid. He goes ahead and Mizium Mortars, the Eidolon of the Great Revel. Good news for Tom is that Reid still takes 2 off that. That's going to put Reid down to 12. Reid, no intention of blocking with that Mystic, swings it at Tom. And Tom hits a 3rd land. And now it is Legion Loyalist, swing for 5, and Reid Duke drops to 7.
And Tom has gone from 1 land on the play to flooding out. Last card in his hand is a mountain.
So now it is on Reid to stabilize. He has to be aware of burn. Burn is a real thing. Also, the fact that Tom still has more creatures in play than Reid does is a concern.
And this is where some of those 1-ofs out of the sideboard, if you brought him in, the Harness by Force, we have seen the Dynacharge, which I don't know if Tom brought in. If I were in his seat, I would have. They could be big players here.
I mean, the trump for Reid would be Nylea's Disciple, right?
Yeah, it's a 3/3, and going from 7 to 10 right now would be huge.
Reid will tap out for Arbor Colossus. If Tom can draw that Harness by Force, that will get him the game.
Dynacharge also gets it done.
I believe it's another Legion Loyalist.
Yeah, whatever. Gets Reid to 3.
I mean, I think if that's what it is,
If that's what it is, whatever.
All right, he's going to swing the team. Okay, it's probably something else. Arbor Colossus jumps in front of Burning Tree Emissary. Reid goes down to 4. And it's Boros Reckoner.
Not bad here either.
That's huge. So how Reid needs to get that off the table without taking 4 points of damage. That's going to be difficult for him.
Yeah, at this point, it feels like Reid really needs Nylea's Disciple.
Yeah.
To have any shot of getting out of this. This Boros Reckoner is going to put him in a huge squeeze.
Temple of Malice, the play for Reid. As a note, it is a black-red temple. He does not play any black cards in his 75. He's just playing a 5th temple. I always think that's a testament to the temples. When you get to the point that people are playing temples when they only play one of the 2 colors on the card, that's when you know that they're really good.
Well, if the temples, imagine, were basic lands, they were just...
Forest comes into play tap, scry 1.
Over Constructed's history, you would have played a lot of copies of those cards in various decks.
Yeah. White had one of those in Future Sight, right?
Yeah.
Just a white mana land that scryed 1. Reid's play for the turn is Pelucranos World Eater, which means if Tom swings or has a removal spell for Elvish Mystic, he actually puts Reid in a really tough spot.
Reid's in a tough spot regardless here. I mean,
if he had another turn, he could have Polukranos fight Boros Reckoner with exactly 3. But that's not going to be good here because there's no way, if Tom swings the Reckoner, he gets a free damage in because Reid has to chump it with Elvish Mystic.
now I think what Tom is considering here is he has the option of sending in everything, and that guarantees put Reid down to 1 because he gets to give trample to the Boros Reckoner, and Reid's only options are no blocks or put Elvish Mystic in front. But it looks like Tom is happy to either put Reid to 1 or allow him to chump block with the Mystic.
Reid's going to go ahead and go to 1 here.
And I believe the reason that he's going to 1 is he has the option next turn of chumping with the Elvish Mystic and using Polukranos to fight the Mystic, which prevents him from dying because no damage will be dealt to the Reckoner.
Well, but Tom's creatures will have trample if he swings with Legion Loyalist.
Oh, if he gets in the next turn, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right, so that play actually doesn't work if Tom
Alpha strikes.
If Tom Alpha strikes.
Yeah.
I mean, no matter which way you slice it, Reid's looking for Nylea's Disciple pretty bad.
Yeah, that gives him a lot of breathing space, and it doesn't even take Reid that much time to kill Tom on the way back. I mean, his creatures are so big, but the Reckoner might just be too awkward for Reid to beat at this stage.
Bow of Nylea would also do it here, I think.
Yeah, Bow of Nylea would be excellent.
And it's going to be Genesis Hydra for 3 for
Reid gave him
Reid.
a look like, yeah, I know I'm up against it.
Courser and Setessan Tactics, Temple. So it was for 4. He's going to put Courser of Krufix into play. But I don't think he can survive. The Reckoner is just going to kill him.
There does not appear to be, with Reid now tapped out.
Yeah, he was at 4. He was on Nylea's Disciple or bust there.
He could also have found Sylvan Caryatid. That would have given him a zero power,
yeah,
a 0
it gives
power
him
trap
a
blocker.
redraw.
He gets another shot at it. Yeah, but now I don't think there's anything to be done.
And this may be the first loss for Reid's green-red devotion deck today. Polukranos, the top card of his deck. He hasn't played a land yet this turn, but I'm not sure there's too many things he can do off 1 land. It's hard to be attacked by a Boros Reckoner and not take 1. See a swing of just Arbor Colossus from Reid. I'll put Tom to 12. And the swing here will get the game for Tom.
Yeah.
How do you decide on Reid's side what to swing with?
You need to keep up appearances.
Okay, Tom says the damage is
all.
at you.
Yep, that's all. And you can see now, as Tom wins this match 2-1, why Reid has to mulligan pretty aggressively on the draw. I'm not saying that the handicap was a mistake, but he just stumbled a little bit too long, even though he had a good opening there. Tom even flooded out a little bit, and Reid was not able to stabilize the game.
So Reid's his hand on the draw had a turn 1 Elvish Mystic, a turn 2 Voyaging Satyr. Could have wished that was a little bit better, and a turn 3 Arbor Colossus.